Alright, what's going on, guys? In the long wait for Elden Ring DLC, there's one question that's been consistently popping up that we haven't really addressed in a full dedicated video, and that is, well, how big is the DLC really going to be? And the obvious cop-out answer here is nobody really knows. But, as one of our favorite things to do here on the channel is speculate, we actually do have quite a bit of evidence to dive into that points to Shadow of the Erdtree being absolutely massive, and potentially the size of almost another game. And this is reinforced by some news that came out just a few days ago that we're going to break down in detail. But as we get into all that today, if you want to stay up to date on all things Elden Ring, Armored Core, and FromSoftware, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and now let's get into it. To begin our discussion today, we need to frame it in light of recent news. On Thursday, we got the new financial report from Kadokawa for the fiscal quarter ending June 30th, where they detailed the plans for FromSoftware in quarter 2 and beyond. And in this section, they detailed the following: that Elden Ring had generally suffered lowered sales in the last quarter, which makes sense because the game is almost a year and a half old. And then in the outlook for quarter 2 and beyond, they shared various measures are currently in progress for Elden Ring, including the development of major DLC to maximize LTV, which means lifetime value. And then they briefly say under that Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon is scheduled to be released on August 25th by FromSoftware. Now, even though we only got one sentence about the DLC, it does tell us a little bit. First off, there's that phrase about various methods, including the DLC, to maximize lifetime value. That phrase is undefined, and it's very broad. It could be new content, it could be marketing, or it could be third-party multimedia, all of which we've seen before. The game gets decently regular updates every few months, and there has been an okay marketing presence for the past year, and there's also the Elden Ring manga, which is still running. These are all technically things that contribute to the overall lifetime value of the IP, but when they mention the actual DLC, they say including major DLC, and this is the first time we've seen an adjective attributed to it. Now, that could mean a lot of things. We do have to keep in mind that Elden Ring has technically had DLC before. We had the Colosseum update back in December, which was technically referred to as a DLC. Now, to be fair, the Colosseum update wasn't that big of a deal when it comes to non-players and especially investors, and as such, the Colosseum update was never mentioned in their IR reports, which that's a rabbit hole of its own, but I do think it paints the picture that them referring to Shadow of the Erdtree as a major DLC may not be in comparison to the Colosseums. Instead, the word major likely refers to the size of the DLC, and we have good reason to believe that. One other thing you may notice about the way DLC is referred to in this report is that it's listed above the bullet about Armored Core's release, and I found that interesting. Now, obviously that doesn't mean that the DLC is going to come out before Armored Core. What this means is that Kadokawa wants the investors to see this first, and that they think DLC is a higher priority to those investors. To put this into perspective, if you are a shareholder of Kadokawa, Elden Ring is your #1 priority. Released at the same time as the IR report, we got a financial statement for FromSoftware detailing their overall revenue for the past year as of March. Now, you're seeing a very terrible translation on screen now, but what this shows is that FromSoftware had an overall profit of 8.7 billion yen, roughly equivalent to about 61 million US dollars, and that's not even including the first month of Elden Ring's release. That is a lot of money to get from one game, which is one subsidiary company of Kadokawa. So to say the investors are interested in Elden Ring would be a massive understatement. They want this DLC, and they want it to have a price tag. Now let's also consider some insider information that we learned a few months ago. Elden Ring was originally supposed to launch with a season pass and have multiple DLCs, but for a reason we don't know, that idea was scrapped and now those are combined in Shadow of the Erdtree. And that made a lot of sense given how silent everything about Elden Ring was for almost an entire year. And even when we consider the name of the DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, it's very broad in comparison to what we've had in the past. The Ringed City, Ashes of Ariandel, the Old Hunters, the Three King DLCs, and Artorias of the Abyss, all very specific names. Shadow of the Erdtree can quite literally mean anything in the game, as seen by the official Elden Ring account using that exact terminology to reference the entire lands between. So if we were only going on name alone and we didn't have the image to accompany the DLC, we would have almost no direction of its contents. So this very vague and broad name is a fantastic sign if you're hoping the DLC is going to be massive, because according to its name, it could be about anything. But we can't talk about the DLC and not talk about the development time. By the time we actually get our hands on DLC, it'll be around 2 years of waiting. By far the longest we've ever had to wait for a DLC, and we do have confirmation that it's been in development ever since Elden Ring's release, with some sources having Shadow of the Erdtree as a project in January of 2022. Now, we really don't have a whole lot of accurate information to gauge a release date for the DLC, but it's safe to assume that total development time on the DLC so far is at least a year and a half, and that is more than enough time for them to make a substantially large DLC. But let's put this in perspective for a moment. The biggest DLC we ever got for a FromSoftware game was The Ring City, which came out around a year after Dark Souls 3's release, and already had an entire DLC between that and the initial game. So in order to temper expectations, I would say a Ring City sized DLC is the bare minimum. But that's one of the one things we need to think about: expectations. If they were to drop a DLC the size of the Ring City, I can't help but think people would be let down, because Elden Ring was such a giant game, greater in scale than we could have ever imagined, and it delivered that wow factor where the map continually unveiled itself every single time we thought we had finally figured it out and were satisfied. An entire new area would present itself, and that's really what people are going to be looking for with the DLC, to capture that same magic, and I don't think that's wrong at all. FromSoftware is definitely going to be expecting that, and not only from their dedicated fan base, it's those casual players who are going to be expecting the same thing as the original game, and they're going to wonder why they've waited 2 years for this. That is a thought also that will be shared by the investors. So when it comes to realistically meeting those expectations, what do I think could do that? In my opinion, it would have to at least be 2/3 of the above ground map. If they were to deliver something like the start of the game all the way through Lane Dell, not counting the underground, I think fans would be relatively happy. That would give plenty of exploration with 2 or 3 major legacy dungeons, and throw in some retroactive changes to the original map. And I think that's also realistic given the time of development. For a major FromSoftware game like Dark Souls 3, it takes them about 3 years from initial concept to delivery. So for a game DLC that's going to be reusing a lot of assets, and they're not working from scratch, 2 years is plenty of time to develop something big. So my overall point is this: Elden Ring DLC has to be huge. At this point, it's really not an option for them to release anything that's not at least comparable to some of their old games in size. But even given those lofty expectations, we have no reason to believe that they won't deliver something exactly like that. Do you believe the DLC is going to be the biggest we've ever gotten, or do you think there's a possibility for us to be let down? Personally, I just don't see any chance where it's not absolutely massive. Anyways though guys, I've just been getting that question so much. Pretty much every stream I do, it's been getting spammed in the chat. So I thought I'd just come on here and give you my quick thoughts. But if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. And with all that, I will catch you in the next one.